It has been so long since we ran the Chinese Grand Prix in Formula One. Listen to some of these names that were on the grid back in 2019. This should paint a picture on how long ago this was. Antonio Giovinazzi, Robert Kubica, Kimi Räikkönen was still going for the Alfa Romeo team, Daniel Kvyat, and the man on fire, Roman Grosjean, was on the grid.
Jeez.
Welcome back to 2019, folks. This is Turn One Podcast. We're your hosts, Thomas
And Jeremiah.
We are going to do a quick preview of the 2024 Chinese Grand Prix in Formula One. We're going to start by going back to that 2019 race and just looking at how it shook out. We're going to take you into the modern day track, kind of break that down, give you the layout. I think this is one of Jeremiah's potential favorite tracks on the F1 calendar. And then we're going to look at the 2024 standings and give you our predictions for the top three in a wild card for this Grand Prix. Going back to 2019, what are your overall impressions of that era of Formula One? This is way different than we stand now.
Well, Mercedes dominance for one. That was the biggest one, probably. An upcoming Max Verstappen, as he was getting his bearings, he was partnered up with Pierre Gasly at Red Bull. Daniel Ricciardo was at Renault, so that was in his, experimental phase, which is unfortunate because he finishes 7th in 2019, and then if you go back a year in 2018, he wins the whole thing at Red Bull. So Do
you remember who Danny Rick was paired up with at that Renault team?
Nico Hülkenberg, right?
Before he left and then came back.
Nico Hülkenberg.
So for those of you that are big on Drive to Survive, you know that Nico was kind of around in the beginning. He was paired up with Danny Rick, and then he just kind of goes away for a little bit, and then suddenly, last year, here he comes back with Haas after a 3-year absence from the sport.
Yeah.
So yeah, Jeremiah nailed it. This was prime Mercedes dominating. Valtteri and Lewis were winning every other race. Toto Wolff was the man in Formula One team principles. And funny enough, in this race, Valtteri actually qualified first back in 2019.
That he did.
He could. We've talked about this several times throughout the history of our show. I don't know if Valtteri got enough credit. I really don't. The guy was good.
No, I went back and I watched his onboard of that pole lap, and dude, it was like poetry. He nails every single apex flawlessly, doesn't lose any momentum through any corners whatsoever, and it's perfect. It's a perfect lap in my opinion.
Jeremiah also mentioned that this was Daniel Ricciardo's experimental phase. He obviously had left Red Bull to go try his hand at Renault, which we all were confused by because at the time Renault did not have a reliable car, couldn't get an engine that would work for an entire race, so he was struggling throughout the year. This was also experimental for some other drivers. Sebastian Vettel at the time was hanging around at Ferrari, and while he wasn't the dominant Sebastian Vettel of the Red Bull cars, he was getting pretty regular, like top 5, top 6 finishes in that Ferrari car.
He came in third, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he did in 2019 Chinese Grand Prix. And this is also the year where, I don't know if this was his breakout year. I don't know if you saved that for 2021, but Max Verstappen was definitely on the scene at this point in 2019 as he's coming.
Oh, yeah.
He's on his way.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, he was paired up with Pierre Gasly.
No!
For those of y'all that don't know, Red Bull left the Mark Webber and Sebastian Vettel era, and they just dabbled with some of these driver pairings, and of course Daniel Ricciardo was there, and then finally they get Danny Rick and Max Verstappen paired up, and then Daniel goes off to experiment with Renault, and then McLaren, and then wherever he is now at RB. I was trying to remember their name. And during that time, they bring in Pierre, right? This was that era. Pierre didn't cut it, so they bring in Albon. Albon didn't cut it, so they bring in Sergio. Red Bull was doing well with Max during this time, but overall kind of struggling as a constructor that had just come off a pretty dominant phase back in the early 2010s.
Yeah, it's weird to think, too. Pierre actually did pretty good in this track. I believe Max came in 4th and Pierre came in 6th, so not too far back behind him.
And Pierre had the fastest lap.
Well, see, there you go. Yeah, like I said, I don't think Pierre did that bad per se. I just don't think that it was. I mean, he was just so far off of Max that they're like, okay, man, listen, we got to go to the next guy. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it wasn't his time. So, anyways, that is the 2019 race. You had Lewis Hamilton actually come back and win that race, surpassing his teammate Valtteri Bottas, who came in second. Again, this was Mercedes dominant, so them going 1-2 or 1-3 was par for the course. And then Sebastian Vettel in that Ferrari getting third, and Max Verstappen getting fourth. And correct me if I'm wrong, was this Charles Leclerc's first year at Ferrari? He came in fifth that year.
I guess it has to be if I'm thinking about it, because I believe the year before that he was at Alfa Romeo. So
It was because he only had 1 year at Alfa Romeo in 2018. This was
wow.
2019, his first year at Ferrari.
So it was the young up and coming Charles Leclerc partnered up with the 4-time champion Sebastian Vettel at Ferrari. Ooh, that's nasty.
And that's where kind of, I guess, Ferrari just laid claim to Charles Leclerc being their guy. And they've stuck with that ever since. I mean, credit where credit's due. For 5 years now, they've stuck with Charles Leclerc as their guy, and they haven't really deviated from that.
Which, if you know Ferrari, that's not typically their move.
Yeah, it's odd, especially when they're not winning a lot. But, it is what it is. Let's look at this track. This might be the area that you want to own the most because you've played it in the video games. You've seen a lot of video of it. But walk us through the Shanghai International Circuit.
I love this circuit. It's so fun to drive. Obviously, I've never been in an actual car going around this track. I would love to one day. But as far as the games are concerned, that's about as much track time as I'm getting around this thing. First off, you're going down the long straight, the start finish. You start about halfway down the straight. You're taking off towards turn one. You go into turn one. It's a right-hander that goes into a long loop that goes all the way around until you you're basically doing a 360. You're coming back the other direction, and then finally it levels out and you're going into a left-hander, turns 3 and 4. It straightens out, but you're still doing that loop effect. So it's basically one giant loop into a small little bunny loop. And then you're going 4 to 5 is a nice straight. As you're going into 6, you get a slight little bend, and then the hairpin of 6, which turns you back around, going into another long curve of turn 7 as you're doing a left-handed curve. And then you go into 8. It's almost kind of like the S's right here, but like enlarged massively as you're going through 7, 8, because they're just this long left and then right curves. And then immediately going into 9, I wouldn't necessarily say hairpin, but it definitely gets tight there. As you're going into 10, you're going into basically a 90-degree turn, maybe a little bit wider. And then you go from 10 to 11, you get a nice straight. As you're going into 11, it's another harsh bend as you're going into the long right-hand curve of 12. That kind of emulates turns 2 and 3, but a little bit wider. And then as you're going through the long curve of 12 and 13, you get this massive straight as you approach turns 14 and 15. Now, 14, I would say, is more of a hairpin. Again, you're going to have to get on the brakes pretty rough because then you're going into 15, which is, barely a corner, honestly, if you're looking at it. But, it's pretty much a straight from 14 to 16, but 16 is going to be another close to 90. I mean, it's a harsh corner. And then as you hit 90, you're on that, as you hit 16, you're on that back stretch going back to the start finish.
So that stretch between 13 and 14 is 0.7 miles.
Dude, it is massive.
And here's the odd thing. So the Shanghai International Circuit is 3.3 miles or so?
3.387 if you want to be specific.
That's kind of up there, but that's kind of in the middle of some of these F1 tracks. But to me, the track feels massive.
I mean,
it's not.
If you're comparing it to like a spa, then it's not as big. But
right.
3.387, or honestly 3 miles and up, it's pretty dang big.
Like, I think it's even smaller than Silverstone is, which is wild. Yeah, Silverstone's 3.6.
Okay, so then it's about around where the tracks are.
But again, to me, if I without any knowledge of the length of the tracks, I would put this in the top 3 longest circuits.
Yeah, and it might just be because you're slowing down a bunch. Yes, it does have its straights, but a lot of this is where you're going to have to get on the brakes and do kind of a harsh turn. So maybe that, like if you were to look at the time around for one lap, how long it takes to go around one lap compared to like Silverstone, I'll bet you it's a little bit longer. I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, Valtteri's pole in 2019 was 131. Silverstone in 2023, I have no idea. Maybe we can find that later.
Okay, well, while you could continue to talk, I'm going to look up the 2019 pole of Silverstone.
Okay, so here's what I'm talking about with this track. This might be one of the most technical tracks on the F1 circuit. Yes, there's speed. Yes, there's aero and downforce packages required, but the technical skill of the drivers is going to come in the heaviest here. Why? Looking at turns 1 through 4 as you're going through the kind of that little snail spiral bit at the very start of the race, it's not all heavy braking. It's not all full throttle. It is a lot of lift, throttle, brake, lift, throttle, brake. And it is finding that perfect balance of the two for these drivers that's key. Coming through 6 is pretty heavy braking around the hairpin. But then Jeremiah mentioned this kind of that S bend of 7, 8, and 9. It's not flat out, even though it looks like maybe you could be flat out. It is flat out into lifting and then flat out into lifting. And so I think having a fast car is important, but also I think we're going to see the more experienced drivers just in general do better at this track. I could see Lewis doing very well here. He's won here, what, 6 times or so?
Yeah,
Uh,
6 times.
I see the younger drivers like Lando and Oscar and some of them kind of struggling because they haven't had to face this many technical tracks over the course of their career yet. And I could be proved wrong. Maybe the cars outweigh all of that. But to me, if I'm a driver, this feels like one of the most difficult tracks to master just because of all of the different aspects it throws at you in a short amount of time.
Sure. I did get that information on Silverstone while you were going through
Okay.
that, which is kind of coincidental because in 2019, Valtteri Bottas also set the pole lap at Silverstone. So we're looking at the same driver, both setting a pole lap on both different tracks. So Valtteri hit a 125 in Silverstone, and here in China, it's a 131.5. So you're looking at a 6.5 second distance or difference.
On a shorter track.
Right. And as we know in racing, 6.5 seconds, that is a
Forever.
long time.
So, I mean, if you're just looking objectively, like we're not making predictions right now, but what stands out to you about this track as to who might do better here? Like what aspects of the track play better into certain cars or certain drivers' repertoire?
That's tough. We know Lewis has a lot of experience and success here. Mercedes doesn't necessarily have that straight end speed. That hurts them a lot throughout the season. And with how many curves and how many times you have to get on the brakes, you have low speed corners in this. Maybe Mercedes will have a day in comparison to what they've have been having. Obviously, Red Bull is going to run away. That car is built for every track. But I would say Mercedes is going to have a better day. Maybe Aston Martin's going to have a better day. They're going to struggle between 13 and 14 on that long straight because everybody else is just going to be faster down it. But I think through all these different corners and how they're, the low speed corners, you have the hairpins, you have these long loops. I think they might actually do better than they would in the past.
Like, I don't know if this race is going to track with how the rest of the race, like how the rest of the season does, just because this track is kind of an anomaly that we haven't seen in, again, 5 years at this point. Did you know there's only 3 current F1 drivers that have won the Chinese Grand Prix? Can you name the 3?
Yes. Lewis, Daniel. Ooh. Fernando.
Yeah, so you just mentioned Mercedes possibly having a little bit better day than they've been having. You also mentioned Aston Martin, and I agree. I think Fernando could have a pretty good result in China. He's won the thing twice and raced in it for 16 years. Him and Lewis have by far the most experience here of any of the drivers.
Fernando's won it twice. Is that what you said?
Yeah, he won it in 05 and 13.
Oh, wow. I didn't know he won it in 13. Huh.
Yeah. At Ferrari.
Oh, so he did it in a Renault and in a Ferrari.
Yeah.
Well played, sir.
And then Danny Rick won in his last year with Red Bull in 2018. And then
Good
he
old
left.
Danny. Yeah.
I've got one more fun fact before we make predictions. I was searching around on the Shanghai circuit. Did you know that the track, which is a very unique layout for an F1 track, like this track is wild looking. It is inspired by the Chinese character Shang, which is the first character of Shanghai, the city, and it looks almost identical to the Chinese character.
That's pretty sweet.
It's like a line, and then a line up, and then a little line across at the top.
That's so awesome.
So they kind of nailed it. So there's some symbolism in that track as well. Okay, looking at the standings real quick. Obviously, Red Bull is in the lead. They are at 141, Ferrari at 120, and McLaren at 69. Looking over the drivers, you have Verstappen in the lead at 77, Checo at 64, and then Charles 59 and Carlos 55. And we brought this up last week. Arguably, Carlos should be third right now because he had his appendix explode. So that actually hurt Ferrari a little bit, even though Ollie Behrman did get points back when he raced. I guess I will kick us off with, or did I go first last time, or did you go first last time on predictions?
You went first.
Then your turn. I get to steal your picks.
This is going to be shocking, so stay with me. Max is going to win. All right, on a serious note. So Max takes the win. I'm going to go Checo out of the top 3 on this one. Give me Lando Norris to take second. Give me Carlos Sainz to take third.
He's mixing it up finally, folks.
Give me Lewis in either 4th or 5th. I'm going to go with 5th. Now, reminder, they've been finishing about 7th and 8th lately. But give me him in 5th.
Okay, I could see it. So that's your wild card.
Yeah.
Is Lewis in somewhere in the top 5?
Yeah.
Okay, my top 3. Max Verstappen will win this race. Let's be honest, folks. You're kind of stealing my bit, which was voting Lando Norris high, but I actually wasn't going to go that route for this race. Give me Carlos Sainz in the 2 spot.
Ooh,
I think he's better than pretty much everybody else out there. And number 3, I don't know how I feel about this.
Nico
Lewis Hamilton. Give me Lewis
Hamilton.
Oh! I don't think they have a good car this year. I don't think Mercedes is going to do well. I don't think Lewis is going to do well. But I think if they have a chance at any point in the F1 season to get a top 3 solid result, this is it.
I'm here for it. I love it.
And here's my wild card. I've got 2 for you. 1, give me Fernando Alonso in the top 6.
Okay.
And give me George Russell to not finish the race.
Ooh.
He will crash on this circuit.
That's wild that you said that, because I was going to say, give me Alex Albon to not finish this race.
And I agree. It's definitely possible. There are so many areas on this track that are going to put the drivers in very close proximity, again, in very technical aspects of lifting, throttling, coasting, braking. And if one of the 2 drivers that are running side by side messes up that pattern, you're going to crash out. And we know George's aggressiveness. We know Albon's aggressiveness. Now, they have aggressive levels for different reasons. Albon is aggressive because he's in a backmarker team that is trying to compete for points. I don't know why George is aggressive. He doesn't need to be. So one has an excuse and the other really doesn't. But we have both seen time after time they put their cars in dangerous positions. And I think this track sets up well for multiple incidents throughout the race day.
I've got one more for you. This isn't a huge one, which is why I didn't really start with it. Give me Daniel Ricciardo to beat Yuki Tsunoda on this track.
Yeah, he did win it.
By the way, one mention that we didn't even say, welcome to your first ever home Grand Prix, Zhou Guanyu.
He finally gets it. He gets his home Grand Prix.
Finally.
We didn't even talk about that. We said that the last time the race was run was 2019, and that's because, of course, COVID hit in 2020, and then they proceeded they scheduled it for 2021. They scheduled it for 2022. They scheduled it for 2023.
They've been dangling this home Grand Prix carrot in front of Zhou Guanyu for years, and he's finally going to get it.
Like, I'm not wrong, right? Like, every year after, like, 2020 was the only year definitively we knew it was canceled until weeks, if not months, before the race. Every other year they'd pull the plug.
Yeah, it was 2021. Oh, it's coming. It's coming. No, we're not going to do it. Dang it. And then 2022. Oh, it's coming. It's coming. Nope, not going to do it. Dang it. And then again last year, same thing.
Well, we finally get it, and Zhou finally gets to place 15th in his home Grand Prix. I am so excited for him. He's going to have such a fun time.
No.
Guys, let us know in the comments, what is your top 3 for the 2024 Chinese Grand Prix, and give us a wild card while you're at it.
Guys, if you think Zhou Guanyu comes in the top 5 for his home Grand Prix, first one ever since 2019, I might be right there with you.
All right, guys, we'll see you.
Bye, guys.